The cinema screen flickered to life in the makeshift theater. Dust motes danced through the projection beam. 200 German officers sat in wooden chairs, their eyes fixed on something impossible. What they witnessed that evening would shatter everything they believed about America. The date was June 4th, 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas, stretched under the relentless summer heat. Inside the recreation hall, men who had fought across North African deserts now faced a different kind of warfare. This battle would be fought with images and sound, with stories that moved and music that soared. One officer clutched a concealed journal. His fountain pen shook as he scribbled notes that could have meant death if discovered back in Africa. The SS guards would have beaten him senseless for such thoughts. But here, in this Texas camp, dangerous ideas were taking root. Gone with the Wind swept across the screen in Technicolor glory. Vivian Leigh commanded every frame. The orchestral score thundered through speakers. Production values that seemed impossible filled their vision. These veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps had expected primitive American culture, jazz music and gangster films, nothing more sophisticated than that. What they saw instead defied every assumption Nazi propaganda had planted in their minds. 4 hours of epic cinema, technical mastery that left German officers speechless, a budget of $385 million for a single film. More money than Germany's entire film industry spent in a year. The irony cut deep. Here was America's own Civil War, their own defeat and reconstruction. Yet they had turned their national trauma into art that celebrated human resilience. German cinema could barely manage black and white propaganda reels. Meanwhile, in what Nazi leadership called a mongrel nation of cultural inferiors, prisoners watched storytelling that reached levels German filmmakers could only dream about. Earlier that day, 1,850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's legendary Africa Corps had stepped down from passenger trains. The entire population of this small Texas town had turned out to witness their arrival. None of them understood they were about to witness the most unexpected psychological transformation in military detention history. The mathematics of ideological conversion were being calculated not in interrogation rooms, but in darkened theaters. Hollywood's dream factory was about to accomplish what no military victory could achieve: a systematic reconstruction of Nazi consciousness through the hypnotic power of American cinema. The surrender had come on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnhem, who had replaced the legendary Rommel after his recall, raised the white flag. Approximately 275,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners that day. Among them stood men who had earned Churchill's grudging respect: the Wehrmacht's elite desert warriors, soldiers who had driven the British back to El Alamein, veterans of Poland and France who wore the Knight's Cross with pride. Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter was one of them. His Knight's Cross caught the African sun as American soldiers processed the captured officers. The journey from that moment of defeat to psychological revelation would begin in the transit camps of North Africa. American efficiency was already cracking their preconceptions as thousands of POWs waited for transport ships, but nothing could have prepared them for what awaited in America's heartland. Not just the material abundance they would witness, the cultural sophistication that would overwhelm every stereotype. The first hint came aboard Liberty ships crossing the Atlantic. In the enlisted men's mess, American guards had set up a projector. Something unprecedented was about to happen. Feldwebel Otto Kraus, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, would never forget that moment. They showed them a film on the ship to America. Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator. German soldiers watching a Jewish actor mock the Führer. The prisoners didn't know whether to be offended or amazed. Most had never seen Chaplin's work. His films had been banned in Germany since 1933. The Little Tramp was forbidden fruit. Yet here was this Jewish comedian, not just mocking their leader, but doing it with such skill that even hostile audiences found themselves laughing. The American military had discovered something remarkable. Hollywood films were proving more effective than any propaganda lecture. They demonstrated American values and capabilities without preaching. Entertainment became education. Stories became arguments that bypassed intellectual defenses. Prisoners had access to radios. Movies were shown as often as 4 nights a week. If camps lacked projectors, prisoners often pooled their meager savings to purchase equipment themselves. The hunger for these films was insatiable. August 15, 1943, Camp Clinton, Mississippi. The base camp had just completed construction of its theater, a facility built by the prisoners themselves that could seat several hundred men. 25 generals were housed there, along with colonels, majors, and captains. General Gustav von Wurst ranked among the highest German officers held at Clinton. He stood at the back of the hall as lights dimmed for the inaugural screening. What happened next would challenge everything he understood about American society. The film was Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The story unfolded with devastating clarity. An idealistic young man fighting corruption in the American government. Newspapers attacking their own leaders. Politicians exposed as corrupt. Democracy shown with all its flaws and contradictions. It was incomprehensible. Von Wurst would later struggle to find words for what he witnessed. Here was an American film showing corruption in their own government. A naive man fighting their political system. Media criticism of their leadership. In Germany, such a film would mean death for everyone involved. Writers, directors, actors, even theater owners would face execution. Yet Americans showed it to enemy prisoners without hesitation. They displayed their democracy's imperfections as if weakness was actually strength, self-criticism as if doubt was actually confidence. The cinema served multiple purposes beyond entertainment. It became an important re-education tool. Hollywood anti-Nazi films were shown alongside regular entertainment. Cartoons like Hair Meets Hair made German prisoners laugh at their former leaders. The Why We Fight series used their own propaganda against them. American World War II films shown in camps mostly dealt with the Pacific War. This careful selection avoided creating resentment while still demonstrating American military capability. Prisoners could admire American courage without feeling personally attacked. The projection equipment itself fascinated German technicians. These camps used 16mm Bell and Howell projectors. Machines that ran so smoothly and quietly that German engineers, who prided themselves on mechanical excellence, spent hours studying their construction. Unteroffizier Friedrich Becker worked at Zeiss Optical Works before the war. His engineering background made him acutely aware of what he was witnessing. The precision of American projectors exceeded anything Germany produced. They ran for hours without overheating. Sound synchronization was perfect. Every mechanical detail revealed American technical superiority that extended to every field of endeavor. October 3, 1943, Camp Hearn, Texas. The prisoners had built themselves a theater complete with orchestra pit. They performed elaborate skits and plays for their own entertainment. But tonight, German POWs crowded into the theater for something special. The film was Mrs. Miniver, MGM's Academy Award-winning drama about British resilience during the Blitz. The irony was almost unbearable for some viewers. Hauptmann Erich Müller had been a Luftwaffe pilot. He had bombed London personally. He had seen the destruction from his cockpit as buildings collapsed and fires spread. He knew the damage German bombs had inflicted on British civilians. Yet here was a film showing British courage, with such sympathy and humanity that German soldiers were weeping for British victims. Men who had participated in the bombing campaign found themselves emotionally devastated by seeing their victims portrayed as complex human beings rather than faceless enemies. The experience shattered something fundamental in their worldview. These were not subhuman enemies deserving destruction. They were people with families, hopes, fears, and dreams, just like themselves. Joseph Goebbels had grudgingly praised this drama's remarkable impact. Mrs. Miniver shows the destiny of a family during the current war. Its refined, powerful propagandistic tendency has up to now only been dreamed of. There is not a single angry word spoken against Germany. Nevertheless, the anti-German tendency is perfectly accomplished. The film's technical excellence overwhelmed German officers completely. Joseph Ruttenberg's cinematography captured light and shadow with unprecedented subtlety. Herbert Stothart's score enhanced emotional moments without overwhelming them. The seamless editing made time flow naturally. Every element demonstrated filmmaking sophistication that German cinema couldn't approach. More disturbing still was the film's emotional power. These Wehrmacht officers, many of whom had participated directly in London raids, found themselves sympathizing with British victims. The humanity of their former enemies became undeniably real. Winston Churchill once declared that this film had done more for the war effort than a flotilla of destroyers. Watching the German prisoners' reactions, camp commanders were beginning to understand exactly what he meant. November 1943 marked a turning point in the film program's evolution. The Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had decided to begin showing Frank Capra's Why We Fight series to German POWs. The decision was controversial within military circles. These films used captured German footage against its creators. Scenes from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will were turned into evidence of German militarism. The very rallies that had filled German hearts with pride became proof of their nation's aggressive intentions. Academy Award-winning filmmaker Frank Capra had been both impressed and challenged by Riefenstahl's 1935 propaganda masterpiece. He worked in direct response to her techniques. His goal became clear. Let the enemy prove to American soldiers the enormity of his cause and the justness of ours. He would compile enemy speeches, films, newsreels, and newspaper articles, a litany of hostile actions presented with devastating effect. The enemy's own words and images became weapons against their ideology. Camp McCain housed 7,700 prisoners. Camp Clinton held 3,400. Camp Shelby housed 5,300. At Camp McCain near Grenada, Mississippi, the first screening of Prelude to War caused an immediate uproar. SS officers attempted to organize a boycott before the film even began. Their efforts failed spectacularly. They were immediately transferred to Camp Alva, Oklahoma, the special detention center for unrepentant Nazis. Their removal sent a clear message to other potential troublemakers. Most prisoners watched transfixed. They were seeing their own propaganda transformed into evidence against them. The same rallies that had filled them with patriotic fervor now appeared as proof of German militaristic aggression. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann struggled to process what he was seeing. To see the Nuremberg rallies, which had filled us with such pride, presented as evidence of our militaristic aggression. It was like watching your life through a different lens. Everything the same, yet everything reversed. The series achieved something unexpected for German POWs. It provided context for Germany's actions that even Germans hadn't possessed. Many prisoners had never seen the full scope of Nazi rallies, had never heard complete Hitler speeches, had never understood how their nation appeared to the outside world. Through American eyes, their patriotic displays looked like threats. Their military pride appeared as aggressive posturing. Their unity seemed like mindless conformity. The transformation of perspective was devastating. What most astonished German POWs was Hollywood's willingness to criticize America itself. In December 1943, Camp Shelby showed John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath. The screening would prove as shocking as any propaganda film. The depiction of American poverty during the Depression challenged every assumption about capitalist prosperity. Criticism of banks and authorities came from American filmmakers themselves. Sympathy for common people struggling against powerful institutions defied everything Nazi propaganda had taught about American heartlessness. Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Hoffmann had been a Nazi Party education officer before his capture. His ideological training made him particularly sensitive to what he was witnessing. They show their own failures, their own injustices. No German film under Hitler could show German poverty, German suffering caused by German institutions. This self-criticism was not weakness. It was strength we couldn't comprehend. The camp libraries began receiving unprecedented requests for John Steinbeck's novel. Within months, translation circles had formed throughout the camps. POWs were creating handwritten German versions of American literature they discovered through films. The American camp authorities, rather than forbidding this activity, actively encouraged it. Major Edward Davison served as chief of the Special Projects Division Education Program. His January 1944 report documented remarkable changes. The prisoners' consumption of American literature has increased 400% since the expanded film program began. They want to read the sources of the films. Gone with the Wind led to requests for books about the American Civil War. The Grapes of Wrath sparked interest in Depression-era history. Prisoners were educating themselves about American culture with an enthusiasm that shocked their captors. An unexpected catalyst for psychological change came from Walt Disney Studios. In February 1944, Camp Hearn began showing Disney animations before feature films. The reaction was immediate and profound. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs amazed audiences accustomed to crude propaganda cartoons. Pinocchio demonstrated technical artistry beyond German capabilities. Fantasia created sensations among prisoners who had never imagined such possibilities. These weren't propaganda films at all. They were pure entertainment, created for the joy of creation itself. Yet their impact on German consciousness was more profound than any political lecture. Hauptmann Otto Kleist observed something that shook his understanding of American culture. To see Fantasia, this marriage of animation and classical music, Bach and Beethoven interpreted through American imagination. It destroyed our concept of American culture as inferior. The technical mastery, the artistic vision, the sheer joy of creation. We had nothing comparable. Animation had been produced by Disney Studios for the Why We Fight series as well. But it was the feature animations that most affected the prisoners emotionally. Many had children in Germany they hadn't seen in years. The emotional impact of these family films, combined with their technical brilliance, created psychological conflict that propaganda couldn't achieve. Unteroffizier Werner Braun was an artist from Munich before the war. He spent weeks attempting to recreate Disney animation techniques with whatever materials he could find. American animators were decades ahead of us. If they could do this with cartoons, what else were they capable of? The very projection of films became education in American excellence. German POWs were often assigned to projection duty. They maintained and operated equipment that demonstrated American manufacturing superiority in every component. The camps received films through the Army Motion Picture Service. This system distributed 16-millimeter prints to military installations worldwide. By March 1944, films were reaching POW camps within 2 weeks of their theatrical release. These base camps had most facilities and services found in small towns: dentists, doctors, libraries, movies, educational facilities. English language classes proved most popular among prisoners. Athletics provided recreation, with soccer being the favorite sport. At Camp Shelby, Gefreiter Helmut Wagner brought valuable experience as a former projectionist at UFA Studios in Berlin. He documented the American distribution system with professional interest. Every week, new films arrived. Not propaganda ministry selections, but regular Hollywood productions, musicals, westerns, comedies, dramas. The variety was incredible. In Germany, we might see 12 different films a year. Here we saw that many in a month. The quality of film stock, surviving thousands of showings without significant degradation, exceeded anything German chemistry had produced. The durability alone represented years of research and development. Dr. Friedrich Müller was a chemist from IG Farben before his capture and internment at Camp Clinton. He studied Technicolor through a magnifying glass during projection booth duty. 3-strip color process requires precision coordination beyond our industrial capacity. The chemical stability of dyes, the registration of multiple negatives. Each step represents years of development we hadn't achieved. Perhaps no genre shocked German POWs more completely than American musicals. In May 1944, Camp Hearn showed Yankee Doodle Dandy, starring James Cagney as George M. Cohan. The spectacular patriotic numbers overwhelmed audiences accustomed to martial music and rigid choreography. The energy of tap dancing, the integration of music and narrative, the sheer exuberance of performance. It was entertainment as ideology, yet so expertly crafted that even hostile audiences were swept along. Feldwebel Hans Richter struggled to process what he witnessed. We had been told Americans were uncultured. Then we saw Yankee Doodle Dandy, hundreds of dancers in perfect synchronization, songs that made you want to march despite yourself, production values that must have cost fortunes. And this was entertainment, not propaganda ministry output. The musicals demonstrated something else that challenged Nazi racial theories. American integration, however limited by contemporary standards, was still impossible in Nazi Germany. When Stormy Weather was shown at Camp Shelby in June 1944, featuring Bill Robinson and Lena Horne, the all-black cast performing at the highest level of artistry created cognitive dissonance. While America's own racial problems were evident to anyone paying attention, the mere existence of such films was revolutionary. The celebration of black artists, their elevation to starring roles, their presentation as complex human beings rather than caricatures. None of this was possible under Nazi ideology. Within 2 months of their arrival, German prisoners had transformed their surroundings completely. They decorated mess halls with paintings, chandeliers, and Christmas ornaments. Family photographs adorned walls throughout the barracks. The camps had become communities where German culture mixed with American influences absorbed through film. By autumn 1944, American combat films began arriving in camps across the nation. These weren't films about fighting Germans, however. The Special Projects Division carefully avoided films that might create resentment or reinforce enemy stereotypes. Instead, they showed films about the Pacific War. This allowed German POWs to see American military capability without feeling directly targeted or personally insulted. Guadalcanal Diary, revealed American military improvisation and determination under impossible conditions. 30 Seconds over Tokyo demonstrated bombing capabilities that exceeded anything the Luftwaffe had achieved. Action in the North Atlantic showed merchant marine heroism in keeping supply lines open against submarine attacks. Korvettenkapitän Otto von Minden was a U-boat commander held at Camp Clinton. He watched action in the North Atlantic with professional interest and growing concern. The film shows anti-submarine tactics we hadn't encountered. Either it's Hollywood fantasy or the Americans have capabilities we didn't know about. Given what else we've seen, I fear it's the latter. The combat films served another crucial purpose beyond demonstrating American capabilities. They showed American self-sacrifice and heroism in ways that humanized the enemy. German soldiers, who had been told Americans were cowardly materialists, saw films depicting individual courage that matched their own warrior ideology. April 1945 brought the war's end in Europe. With it came the most devastating films German POWs would ever see. As American forces liberated concentration camps across Germany and Poland, the Signal Corps filmed everything they found. Within weeks, these films were being shown in POW camps across America. The footage engendered shock, anger, and disbelief among viewers. Amazed and disbelieving prisoners nicknamed them Noxon films, films of bones. However, many prisoners accepted the films as factual documentation rather than propaganda fabrication. After compulsory viewing of an atrocity film, 1,000 prisoners at Camp Butler burned their German uniforms in a gesture of repudiation. At Camp Shelby, the screening of concentration camp footage on May 15, 1945, was preceded by a careful announcement. What you are about to see was filmed by American Signal Corps cameramen. No scenes were staged. No images were altered. The film ran for 20 minutes. The theater, usually filled with conversation and movement, was silent except for sobbing. The weight of evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Not all prisoners accepted the films initially. At Camp Hearn, several prisoners insisted the footage was fabricated for propaganda purposes. The American authorities responded not with punishment, but with additional evidence. Copies of German documents, testimonies from American soldiers, additional footage from multiple camps. The cumulative evidence became impossible to deny or dismiss. By June 1945, the film program had become central to the massive re-education effort taking place across American POW camps. Der Ruf was a German-language newspaper published at Fort Kearny in Rhode Island during World War II by captured prisoners of war. It was distributed to about 140 other POW camps throughout the United States. The paper published 26 issues during its iteration as a POW publication. Far from costing U.S. taxpayers money, Der Ruf actually ended up making a small profit through subscriptions and sales. The newspaper began reviewing films and discussing their meaning for Germany's future reconstruction. A typical review from August 1945 analyzed American cinema with sophisticated understanding. These films show American soldiers returning home, struggling with peacetime, questioning their sacrifice. That America would make such films, showing doubt and difficulty rather than victory parades, demonstrates a maturity we must learn. Democracy means showing truth, even uncomfortable truth. The prisoners selected to come to Fort Kearny to write for Der Ruf represented an intellectual elite. They were carefully chosen from various prison camps across the nation. These intellectuals, writers, artists, and professors had been selected for their anti-Nazi views and democratic potential. They became film critics whose reviews shaped how hundreds of thousands of German POWs understood American cinema. Their analysis influenced thinking throughout the POW camp system. The primary goal of Der Ruf was persuading German POWs to focus on the future rebuilding of their country, to abandon Nazi ideas completely and embrace democratic values for post-war reconstruction. No director influenced German POWs more profoundly than Frank Capra. His films presented an America that was both idealized and self-critical, patriotic yet questioning. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Meet John Doe, and You Can't Take It With You became primers in democratic thinking. Frank Capra had become one of America's most influential directors during the 1930s. He won 3 Academy Awards for Best Director. His vision of American democracy, filtered through Hollywood sentiment, became the template for how many German POWs understood American values. George Marshall and even President Roosevelt recognized that Capra was Hollywood's #1 communicator to the public at large. For German POWs, Capra's films became tutorials in democratic philosophy. They showed corruption being defeated by common decency, individual courage triumphing over systemic power, democracy not as perfect, but as perfectible through citizen action and moral courage. An unexpected source of ideological transformation came through Western films. John Ford's Stagecoach, Howard Hawks's Red River, and other Westerns showed individual freedom, frontier justice, and self-reliance that resonated with German military values while simultaneously subverting Nazi collectivism. Major Friedrich von Steuben observed something profound in these films. The Western hero stands alone, principled, fighting for justice without orders from above. This was the opposite of our military culture, yet we admired these figures. They represented a freedom we hadn't understood. The Western landscape itself made an indelible impact on German consciousness. The vast spaces, the unlimited horizons, the sense of infinite possibility. It contrasted absolutely with the cramped, controlled spaces of Nazi Germany. Films became windows into both physical and psychological freedom that German soldiers hadn't imagined possible. The idea that individuals could simply leave, could start over, could reinvent themselves completely. This mobility of both body and spirit was revolutionary. At Camp Shelby, prisoners began writing their own Western stories set in Germany. They imagined lone heroes fighting against authoritarian forces. These stories showed the beginning of democratic imagination among former Wehrmacht soldiers. German prisoners at Camp Hearn, Texas, included members of a complete German military orchestra. They had arrived with their instruments intact and later supplied Camp Hearn with much-needed entertainment throughout their internment. These musicians began incorporating American musical styles learned from films. Jazz rhythms appeared in their compositions for the first time. Swing arrangements replaced traditional martial music. The transformation was audible as well as visual. Hauptmann Ernst Müller conducted the Camp Hearn Orchestra throughout their imprisonment. He noted profound changes in their musical approach. American film music showed us possibilities we hadn't imagined. The integration of classical and popular forms, the emotional directness, the technical sophistication. It was a musical democracy where different styles coexisted and enriched each other. By late 1945, POW orchestras were performing arrangements of American film scores for other prisoners. Over the Rainbow, from The Wizard of Oz, became particularly popular among homesick men. Its lyrics about longing for home resonated deeply with prisoners far from Germany. Hollywood's portrayal of women profoundly affected German POW consciousness. Stars like Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, and Joan Crawford played independent, intelligent women who bore no resemblance to Nazi ideals of femininity. Woman of the Year, shown at Camp Clinton in September 1944, depicted a female journalist more successful than her husband. This role reversal was impossible to imagine in Nazi Germany, where women were relegated to kitchen, church, and children. The presence of women in American films, not just as decoration, but as protagonists driving their own stories, suggested a society where human potential wasn't limited by gender. For men raised in a rigidly patriarchal system, this was genuinely revolutionary. Some rejected these portrayals entirely, but many began questioning the limitations placed on their own wives and daughters back in Germany. Seeds of social change were being planted through entertainment. American comedy films achieved what no propaganda could accomplish. They made German POWs laugh at authority and pretension. The Marx Brothers, Abbott and Costello, Bob Hope. These comedians demolished dignity through humor alone. Duck Soup, shown at Camp Hearn despite concerns about its anti-war message, had German officers laughing at the absurdity of military pomp and circumstance. The very things they had taken most seriously became objects of ridicule. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator was finally shown in October 1945. The reaction was complex and divided. Some prisoners were deeply offended by its mockery of Hitler. Others found it cathartic to laugh at what had terrorized them for years. The film's final speech, Chaplin's passionate plea for humanity over hatred, was translated and circulated in handwritten copies throughout camps nationwide. Its message of hope and human dignity resonated with men ready to embrace new values. Alongside Hollywood entertainment, POWs were shown American documentaries that demonstrated industrial and agricultural capacity with startling honesty. The City, The River, and The Plow That Broke the Plains showed American achievements and failures with equal frankness. These films, produced by government agencies, lacked the crude propagandistic tone of Nazi documentaries. They admitted problems while demonstrating solutions. They showed American society as works in progress, rather than perfect achievement. Dr. Heinrich Bauer was an agricultural specialist from East Prussia before his capture. He watched The River with professional interest and growing respect. It showed American flooding problems, erosion, agricultural failures. Yet it also showed solutions being implemented. In Germany, we would never admit such failures. This honesty about problems, combined with confidence in solving them, was more convincing than any boasting. The Hollywood star system fascinated German POWs completely. The idea that actors were celebrities independent of state control was revolutionary. They could choose roles, criticize studios, even mock political leaders. This suggested freedom beyond Nazi comprehension. When prisoners learned that Clark Gable had enlisted as a private and flown combat missions over Germany, their respect increased dramatically. When they discovered that James Stewart was piloting bombers over their homeland, it shattered their image of American celebrities as decadent cowards. Marlene Dietrich, the German actress who had become an American citizen and entertained Allied troops, was particularly controversial among prisoners. Her films were both beloved and reviled. She represented to different prisoners either betrayal of the fatherland or courage to choose freedom. By Christmas 1945, the cumulative effect of watching hundreds of Hollywood films had achieved what military defeat couldn't accomplish: the complete transformation of consciousness among most German prisoners of war. One comprehensive survey of some 22,000 prisoners reached remarkable conclusions. 74% of German prisoners left American captivity with an appreciation of democratic values and friendly attitudes toward their captors. Only 10% remained militantly Nazi in their thinking. The Special Projects Division's final report noted the program's unprecedented success. Motion pictures proved our most effective tool for demonstrating American values. Films accomplished what lectures, books, and discussions couldn't achieve. They made prisoners feel American democracy rather than merely understand it intellectually. After returning to Germany, Anders and Richter, along with several others from Fort Kearny, founded a new newspaper also called Der Ruf. This iteration of Der Ruf grew to a circulation of 100,000 subscribers throughout occupied Germany. These former POWs would later found Group 47, which dominated German literature for decades after the war. Their influence on post-war German culture was immeasurable. Christmas 1945 provided a culmination of the film program's transformative impact. Special holiday screenings were arranged for German POWs across America. Films like Going My Way and Holiday Inn showed American celebrations and values at their most appealing. At Camp Hearn, thousands of German prisoners watched these films that depicted ordinary American life, with all its hopes and struggles. The film's technical achievements were stunning. Elaborate production numbers, sophisticated cinematography, emotional manipulation through editing and music. American filmmaking at its absolute peak. But it was the film's essential humanity that most affected the prisoners emotionally. They showed them a society that could celebrate even amid struggle, that could find joy in simple pleasures, that could maintain hope despite difficulties. As German POWs began returning to Germany in 1946, they carried with them memories of American films that would shape their nation's democratic reconstruction. Many would rise to prominent positions in West German society. They brought lessons learned in darkened American theaters to positions of influence and power. POWs were guaranteed by international treaty called the Geneva Conventions to receive food, clothing, and medical care equal to that of their captors. But they received something far more valuable: a cultural education that would influence Germany's democratic development for generations. The influence extended far beyond elite intellectual prisoners. Thousands of ordinary German soldiers returned home with fundamentally changed perspectives. They had seen racial integration in American musicals, women's independence in romantic comedies, workers' dignity in social dramas. These images couldn't be unseen or forgotten. American films didn't just change German prisoners permanently. The prisoners' responses changed American understanding of cultural diplomacy forever. The success of the film program influenced American occupation policy throughout Germany. It led to establishment of America houses throughout the country. American films were shown to German civilians as part of denazification efforts. The Motion Picture Export Association, recognizing the profound impact of films on POWs, pushed for increased distribution of American films in post-war Germany. By 1950, American films dominated German theaters completely. They continued the cultural transformation that had begun in POW camps. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, surviving German POWs held a reunion at Camp Hearn. Over 300 former prisoners returned to Texas. Many brought their families to show them where their ideological transformation had begun. Former Obergefreiter Hans Müller had become a successful film distributor in Hamburg after the war. He spoke at the reunion with deep emotion. "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in racial superiority and cultural supremacy. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen through cinema's window a better way to live." The reunion included special screenings of films the prisoners had watched 40 years earlier. Mrs. Miniver, Why We Fight, and Casablanca played again in the same Camp Hearn theater. Former enemies, now allies, watched together. Americans and Germans united in recognition of cinema's transformative power. Former Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter delivered the reunion's keynote address. His words captured the magnitude of their transformation. Hollywood gave us what no military victory could provide: a vision of what we could become. We saw in American films not perfection, but possibility. Not propaganda, but dreams made visible. The films showed us that strength came from diversity, that prosperity came from freedom, that culture flourished without state control. The magnitude of the film program in German POW camps reveals its truly systematic nature. Film infrastructure reached over 380 camps equipped with complete projection facilities. An average of 4 film showings per week occurred at each camp. 16mm prints were distributed through the Army Motion Picture Service to every location. Thousands of individual films were shown across all camps from 1943 to 1946. Film consumption was estimated in millions of individual viewings by German POWs. The average prisoner watched between 150 to 200 films during captivity. The variety included current Hollywood entertainment and documentaries alongside classic films from previous decades. The cultural impact was measurable in multiple ways. Thousands enrolled in film discussion groups at camps nationwide. Der Ruf published extensive film reviews and sophisticated analysis. Many prisoners kept personal logs of every film they watched. Film viewing directly influenced post-war career choices for hundreds of former POWs. Post-war psychological studies revealed the profound and lasting impact of Hollywood films on German POW consciousness. Exposure to American commercial cinema achieved deeper psychological penetration than any formal education programs. Films bypassed intellectual defenses completely. They reached emotional centers where ideology actually resided. The films worked through multiple psychological mechanisms simultaneously. They created emotional engagement with American characters and values. They demonstrated alternative social systems functioning successfully. They showed prosperity achieved without conquest or domination. They presented individual freedom as strength rather than chaos threatening social order. Entertainment created positive associations with American culture that political propaganda couldn't achieve. The pleasure of watching good films became associated with democratic values and American society. Different film genres affected prisoners in distinct and measurable ways. Musicals demonstrated joy and energy that completely challenged German stereotypes about American culture. Westerns presented individual freedom that resonated with military concepts of honor while simultaneously subverting Nazi collectivism. Comedies taught that authority could be mocked without revolution following. Dramas showed psychological complexity equal to the finest European art cinema. War films humanized American soldiers while carefully avoiding demonization of German enemies. Each genre carried implicit ideological messages that accumulated over time into comprehensive worldview transformation. The sheer variety itself suggested something profound. American society could produce such different expressions because it was a pluralistic culture completely foreign to Nazi uniformity. Beyond cultural impact, American films provided technical education that influenced post-war German development significantly. Prisoners studied cinematography, sound design, color technology, special effects, and distribution systems with professional interest. This technical knowledge proved invaluable in rebuilding German film industry after the war's end. Many former POWs found employment in cinema-related fields immediately upon repatriation. They brought American methods and techniques to German production companies. They introduced innovations learned from watching Hollywood films, helping modernize German cinema throughout the 1950s. Their technical expertise, gained through observation, accelerated German film industry recovery. Films demonstrated democracy not through political speeches, but through narrative structures that became internalized. Hollywood films typically showed individual agency triumphing over circumstances. Social mobility achieved through personal effort and determination. Institutional criticism leading to reform rather than revolution. Pluralistic values coexisting peacefully within the same society. Redemption and growth possible for flawed characters. These narrative patterns, repeated across hundreds of films, created entirely new cognitive frameworks for understanding social organization. Films inadvertently provided economic education that proved valuable during Reconstruction. Prisoners observed consumer culture functioning smoothly. Labor relations operating without state intervention. Entrepreneurship flourishing under market conditions. Financial systems operating independently of government control. This economic education proved invaluable when prisoners returned to help rebuild Germany's shattered economy. Many credited American films with helping them understand market mechanisms that would later drive West Germany's economic miracle. The impact of Hollywood films on German POWs extended far beyond their period of imprisonment. Former prisoners became political leaders who brought democratic values to German governance at every level. They became educators, teaching American studies programs in German universities. They became business leaders, applying entrepreneurial models learned through cinema. Cultural producers creating German films influenced by Hollywood techniques and values. Social reformers advocating for changes inspired by American social films they had witnessed. The transformation was so complete and successful that by 1950 West Germany had become America's strongest ally in Europe. This rapid shift from enemy to friend was partially attributable to cultural preparation through cinema exposure during captivity. Historians have called the film program one of the most successful soft power operations in recorded history. Without coercion, without traditional propaganda techniques, American commercial entertainment transformed enemy consciousness completely. German prisoners were housed in barracks that accommodated up to 50 men each. Every 5 barracks shared a mess hall with trained cooks, waiters, silverware, and, by all accounts, excellent food prepared to American military standards. But beyond physical comfort that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements, they received cultural exposure that fundamentally changed their worldview about America and democracy. The program succeeded because it relied not on argument but on attraction. Films didn't tell prisoners what to think about American society. Instead, they showed different ways of thinking, feeling, and organizing social relationships. Entertainment became education without feeling like indoctrination. Stories became ideology, transmission, without triggering psychological resistance. Dreams became political transformation through emotional engagement rather than intellectual coercion. On April 15, 1946, the last contingent of German POWs at Camp Herne prepared for repatriation to their devastated homeland. The final film shown was The Best Years of Our Lives, depicting American veterans struggling with peacetime adjustment. The honest portrayal of difficulties facing returning soldiers resonated deeply with men facing their own uncertain return to occupied Germany. They saw American soldiers dealing with the same problems they would soon face themselves. As the credits rolled, lights came up in the Camp Herne Theater for the final time. German prisoners filed out slowly, reluctant to leave. They were not the same Nazi warriors who had arrived 3 years earlier, full of ideology and hatred. They were men transformed by the hypnotic power of Hollywood's dream factory. They had been stunned, educated, and ultimately converted by the simple act of watching movies in darkened theaters. Their story stands as permanent testament to culture's power over ideology, to soft power's triumph over military force, to the profound truth that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a bomb or bullet, but a story well told on screen. German POWs had arrived in America expecting to find a weak, divided nation torn by racial conflict and economic inequality. Instead, through Hollywood's lens, they discovered a civilization so confident it could criticize itself publicly, so prosperous it could afford pure entertainment without propaganda purpose, so sophisticated it could produce art that transcended national boundaries and touched universal human experiences. They had watched American films for 3 years. They would never be the same people again. In their personal transformation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance that would define the Cold War, the Marshall Plan that would rebuild Europe, the democratic reconstruction of Germany that would make it America's most reliable ally. They had seen democracy performed on screen in countless stories. They would spend the rest of their lives trying to achieve in post-war reality what Hollywood had shown them was possible in dreams. The German POWs were stunned by watching Hollywood films in American prison camps. But more importantly, they were permanently changed by the experience. In that fundamental change lay the foundation for a better world, built one movie at a time through the transformative power of American cinema.